Unlike the Orbea Occam, I'll try and pronounce this one right. The Cotic Jeht is the latest offering from the brand that's been making steel mountain bike frames since 2002. And this particular bike rolls on 29-inch wheels with 140 millimeters of travel and either 140 or 150 millimeter fork up front. The Jeht marks the first steel full suspension bike we've tested, and this first impression has been super positive. Like most steel full suspension bikes, the Jeht has a linkage-driven single pivot that keeps the rear end nice and simple. This is a British-designed bike after all, and there's plenty of room for mud to pass through everywhere and not many places for it to get stuck or pinch or cause any problems in the linkage. The leverage curve of the Jeht suspension feels nice and linear, and it does depend a fair bit on that shock I had to run, and that rear wheel travel is also quite sensitive to changes in rebound and compression. So it's really easy to get this bike kind of dialed in exactly how you want it for your trails and your riding style. You can really tune it well. On the geometry table, this bike has a 467 millimeter reach, so nice and long, kind of in line with a lot of even longer travel bikes. And that's balanced by a 447 millimeter chainstay. Those are the same across all four sizes of the bike. And that longer chainstay measurement did well to kind of balance out this somewhat longer size medium. The seat tube angle is 75.5 degrees, so not the steepest, but with the saddle slammed all the way forward, I didn't have any trouble climbing on it. I was definitely able to find a position that worked, and the head tube angle is 64.5 degrees, so nice and slack. Yeah, helping this bike out a lot on the steep stuff, and that pairs well with the long rear end. The steel frame is made from Reynolds 853 oval form tubing, and the whole frame layout is super mechanic friendly with an external bottom bracket and almost entirely external housing and hoses, with just a chunk of the derailleur housing going through the drive side seat stay, and then of course the internal dropper. There is a brace for the upper pivot that goes through the seat tube, so folks with shorter legs will maybe want to check the full insertion length of the frame they want to buy, just to make sure that they'll be able to get a dropper in there far enough. And a quick note on hydration, the bike does have two water bottle cage mounts. One is right in the crap line of the front tire, where I wouldn't really put anything. And then the other one's inside the frame under the top tube, and I was able to fit the smallest Fidlock bottle in there. It's like, I think, a 450 milliliter. Although it would be really nice to see some better sippy cup placement on this bike. At 33 pounds on the nose, the Cotic Jeht weighs exactly the same as a carbon bike I just tested with the same amount of travel, so certainly not a heavy bike or build. And on a sense, the Jeht climbs really nicely. It's composed, it doesn't bounce around a lot, there's really hardly any pedal bob. I did flip the climb switch closed on almost every ride, just to kind of smooth things out and make it feel a little more efficient. And with that Cane Creek shock, it's not quite fully locked out with the climb switch closed, so you're still getting some traction, you're still getting some benefit of the suspension while climbing. And then on some of the most technical climbs, I did leave it open and really use the suspension to keep traction, and it worked super well. It's not going to sprint to the top like a cross-country bike for sure, because that's not what it's for, but it definitely climbs better than some of the longer travel big bikes that I've been testing lately. And back to the steel frame, when you hop out of the saddle and sprint on this bike, maybe on a flat piece of ground or out of a corner, that's where you can really kind of feel the material when you're pulling across the frame as hard as you can. There's a springiness to it that you don't quite get as much with aluminum and carbon, and it's just a different feel. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a benefit or not, and a lot of the sensation that you might get from a steel hardtail is less noticeable on this bike, since you've got the suspension kind of taking up so much of that dampening quality that a lot of folks notice in steel frames. Then sliding back down the hill, this bike feels really well balanced, though I think part of it's the longer chainstays that are really evening things out, and it has quite a long wheelbase at 1255.8 millimeters. So it's a long bike, and it does feel stable, and it does feel like you can kind of pin it and hold on. But in truth, that's not the nature of this bike. in that way that every bike kind of asks you to play a little differently, or to plow, or whatever its intention may be. The Jeht really wants to play. Like, it really wants you to bound over the rocks instead of plowing through them, and to jump around the trail and have fun, which I found very surprising for a bike this long. And I'd say this is probably the most playful bike with this kind of wheelbase, and especially chainstays this long, that I've ridden so far. And again, with the amount of influence that the shock tune and shock setup can have on the suspension, you can really dial in the Jeht to feel how you want it to, and to lean a little further toward the plow or play sides of the scale as you like. And with that, compared to, say, the DV8 140mm bike that I recently tested, this bike is not one that I would take to a local enduro and go race. You can definitely find the bottom of that 140mm, and the bike can get a little overwhelmed. And like I said, it's not a plow, which is kind of what I would prefer to race enduro, especially on tracks I haven't seen yet. As ever, there's a whole lot more details about this bike over in the full review on Singletracks.com. I just wanted to mention one more thing. Apart from the top build, all of the Jeht models come with 2-piston brakes, and this bike's way too fast to be slowed down like that. For more details, check it all out on Singletracks.com. Thanks.